Happy Monday, folks. I thought about doing, I'm Alec Lewis, by the way. I cover the Vikings for The Athletic. I'm in for Dan Barreiro. Brett Blakemore is in for Justin Guard. I thought about doing, this is your, but I mean, you can't really, replicate excellence, can you?
What would be the leader if you had your choice?
So,
Did you have something ready?
Yeah. So that was it. I was like, this is your, how much money is Brian Flores going to make leader, fan. But no, look, it really, like I said, it's tough to replicate excellence. Couldn't pull it off today, but I am honored and privileged to be here in for Dan Barreiro. Again, my name is Alec Lewis. I write about the Vikings for The Athletic. I also host a podcast wherever you get your podcast. I used to be annoyed when I heard other people say that, and now I'm the one saying it because everyone in the whole entire world has a podcast.
If there was one place you would recommend people listen to your podcast, where would that be?
The iHeartRadio app.
Okay, I think so, yeah.
And Chad Abbott is really going to appreciate me saying that, but it's on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, etc. I wish Garzi was here in some capacity, Brett, because we could,
I get that a lot.
We could go, we would go through the Brosmer Day on Thursday, and it would be a welcome session for the both of us. But to all of you listening, hope you had a Merry Christmas. If you're driving around, I hope you're safe. I mean, if you don't know, I'm from Alabama.
Yeah.
And this weather is not drivable for me. I mean, I actually hitchhiked here from the North Loop. No, Brett, you're looking at me like I'm serious. No chance.
Did you Uber?
No, I drove. Okay. But it's just, prayers to all of those who are driving next to me on the roads is what I would say. We're going to start with Brian Flores. I mentioned it at the top, but Kevin O'Connell at his press conference probably about 2 hours ago was asked about Brian Flores. It was pretty clear in terms of how much he wants him to be the defensive coordinator for the Vikings. Kevin O'Connell said as long as he can have him, which is sensible with what they've been able to do. My joke is that this might be the biggest free agent since Shohei Ohtani in the marketplace, just given the job that Brian Flores has done. And it's been spectacular. And if you've listened on the Friday Football Feast, when I sit up there at some random Buffalo Wild Wings in some city across Minnesota, we praise Brian Flores and the job the defense has done against young quarterbacks, against veteran quarterbacks. And before the season, the Vikings weren't able to re-up Brian Flores' contract. And Brian Flores, if you've read anything that I've written about him or that many have over the course of years, he is a very strong-minded, confident, convicted individual that is very much kind of the ethos of who he is. And a lot of that derives from where he comes from, up in Brooklyn, New York. And so he entered this season essentially with the bet on yourself situation. But to give you a few numbers, Brett, is that okay with you? You know me.
I love it.
I'm a big numbers guy. Brian Flores took over a defense that ranked 23rd in efficiency. That was the Ed Donatel defense, and 23rd feels very kind to what that Ed Donatel defense was. He immediately, Brian Flores did, transform the defense, went from 23rd to 11th in 2023. And those listening to this show will remember that the cornerbacks on that team, it was, yes, Byron Murphy, but a Caleb Evans was out there. Andrew Booth was the number 3 cornerback on that team. Yes, they had Daniil Hunter, but a lot of the players, very few of them were identified by Brian and brought in to fit this particular scheme. So 11th.
Cam Dantzler, what are you doing?
Cam Dantzler, 11th in 2023. And then 2024, the defense moved to 2nd in efficiency. And then this season, they're up to 6th in efficiency. And it's just absurd. Again, you can't overstate enough the job that he's done. And I'm not going to sit here today on this microphone in for Dan Barreiro, you in for Justin Guard. My name's Alec Lewis. I'm not going to sit here today and tell you that I know what's going to happen with Brian Flores. That would be faulty on my end. He's represented by, a conglomerate called CAA that typically puts their clients in the best position to be successful, to use a coaching line. And Brian Flores, look, he wants to be a head coach. He has not made any, he hasn't hid behind that. He's been very open in previous press conferences that is something that he wants. And when he was in Miami, he did a fairly good job down there. And you've seen, obviously, in the recent years with Mike McDaniel, it's not the easiest place to do an exceptional job. And so I think from everything Brian Flores has done, from an on-the-field perspective, from a influence on personnel perspective, Brian Flores has shown an ability that should garner the attention of other owners. But rather than sit here today and talk about what's going to happen, and there's a lot of dynamics at play with, the lawsuit, obviously. I mentioned his strong-mindedness, and he carries that with him kind of on a day-to-day basis coaching. But I'm just going to give you what I think is maybe the most underrated aspect of Brian Flores. Is that okay with you, Brett?
I love it.
If I give that to you and the listeners. So here's the deal. I don't think a lot of people know that Brian Flores' first job in the NFL was not on the coaching staff with the New England Patriots, but it was as a scout with the New England Patriots. And so Brian Flores, they used to have these offices in New England, in Foxborough, where Brian Flores he was essentially sitting in the very back of the entire office with a shelves of tapes, of football tapes. And what Brian Flores did really from sun up to sundown was he would put these tapes in and he would go through all of these evaluations of players, college prospects, low-level college prospects, free agent prospects, and he would watch these tapes and essentially organize them by hand in the back of this office with no one knowing who Brian Flores was or what he would be. And that was his education in the business. And so when you think about Brian Flores' defense, what I often am of the belief gets lost is how much that scouting background that shaped his view of the game has allowed him to be as successful as he's been. And it's scouting his own players. It's evaluating potential free agents. I remember I did a story on him in the winter of 2023, and I was sitting in his office. He's got this big wall in his office with just tabs of players. Some of them were on the roster already. Some of them were free agents he was already coveting for the upcoming cycle. That's how his brain thinks. He is as much a personnel guy as he is a coach on the field. And that evaluation ability plays a key role in the game plans that he puts together on a week-to-week basis. His evaluation of the opposing pass protection unit factors into how he calls the game. His evaluation of what the opposing quarterback can do and can't do factors into the game. And so, so many of these coaches in the NFL in this day and age, they're scheme guys, and really their whole philosophy, their whole mindset is just, how can I put the best scheme together on its surface? Brian Flores there's so much more to it with him that all of it dates back to his introduction to this league. And so his scheme is so adaptable based upon the evaluations that he puts together on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. He's almost the way I would describe it is, there are probably people who are listening to this who are really good at putting puzzles together, or Legos together. And you have an intuition on what to put together. Brian Flores' defense is almost he created the puzzle with a very specific, clear intent, precise, detailed plan, and knows exactly why each piece fits where it's supposed to fit. That is the way this guy coaches on a week-to-week basis. So for me, it's just the one thing that I hope people listen to, think about as they evaluate future coaches is the ability that he has to really be kind of the personnel mind for his unit that he then pieces together on a daily basis. It's a pretty special skill to get when you have a guy in his role. And so I just wanted to start with that, and we'll see where it goes. People ask me all the time, if Brian Flores leaves, who on the current staff could take that position? The two obvious names for me would be Durante Jones or Mike Saravo. But the hope from everyone here, you probably not, Brett, because you're a Packers fan, but the folks listening to this from Vikings fans would be that Brian Flores does not leave this building, and we will see if that happens. That's my first segment, Brett, in here for Dan Barreiro. Wanted to come in with some energy. Yeah. I'm Alec Lewis. I cover the Vikings day to day. This is KFAN, and we'll be back with multiple guests today. John Krasinski, the Athletic, Ben Leber, the legendary former player Ben Leber. Those two guys will be here for the next hour and a half, and I cannot wait to, shepherd the program in that direction. I'm Alec Lewis, and we will be back in a second on KFAN.
It's time for Jonny Athletic, Jonny Athletic, Jonny Athletic, and he's on with Dan Barreiro right now.
Welcome back to the Bumper to Bumper program. In for Dan Barreiro, I am Alec Lewis, and our guest now is John Krasinski, the best in the business. He writes about the Timberwolves and really everything, the Vikings, national NBA stuff for The Athletic. John, can you hear me? How was your Christmas, and what did you think of Snoop Dogg?
I can hear you, Alec, and I can tell you that Christmas was great for the Krasinski family and the in-laws as well. We kind of were over the river and through the woods for all of this last 3, 4, 5 days, but love Snoop, and I think it went over pretty well with the kids as well. Snoop has transcended, kind of age and demographic and everything, and he's a star everywhere. So we very much enjoyed it in our household.
We missed you in the press box. Imagine you would have been dancing, or actually, you probably would have been down there with Snoop. I don't know. That might be possible.
Yeah, I would have loved to jump right in with it. Yeah, the only thing that could have made it better would be to witness it live as you did. But I was able to watch from the comforts of home and enjoyed that just as well.
Love it. Before we get to some Vikings and some Wolves stuff, because there's a lot to talk about on both fronts. I do want to ask, because you usually see this stuff pretty clearly. I know you watch a lot of the games, but what do you think of where the NFC North is right now with Chicago, with Green Bay, with what we saw from Detroit Thursday? Like, how do you, in many ways, view the Vikings' place in what is a very interesting NFC North is?
Yeah, I think interesting is the way to put it, because I was quite frankly shocked at what I saw from Detroit against the Vikings. I know that, kind of they fell on hard times a little bit, and but I just didn't anticipate the steep drop-off in execution and quality of play, all of that we saw, against the Vikings. Credit to Brian Flores and the defense and kind of everything that they did to really fluster the Lions. But that one, I didn't see this whole season coming for the Lions. I thought they were going to be the class of the division. I thought they were going to be in the running for the Super Bowl. I thought all of that, and it's just really gone the wrong way. Now, I do think that with the infrastructure that they have in place, that they can recover fairly quickly. They're good. They're a really good drafting team. They're smart front office. They're well coached. I think if they hire an offensive coordinator and kind of get things going on the right track that way, they can bounce back. But if you're the Vikings, you do have concerns, because if the Lions do pull things back together fairly quickly, and this is more of just a stub your toe year than a decline, then you're also looking at Caleb Williams, who looks legit, and then Jordan Love has looked really good down the stretch after, prior to the injury. And so you're looking at facing some really good quarterbacks for the foreseeable future here, and I think that's a big mountain for the Vikings to climb, even if they do have talent around the roster that it appears they do. So they've got some work cut out for them for sure.
Yeah. Kevin O'Connell talked earlier today about J.J. McCarthy and his availability for Sunday. Essentially said it's going to come down to, whether he can grip the ball consistently and kind of what that looks like from a, just comfortability standpoint. How important do you think him playing this weekend is?
I mean, it would be nice, Alec. I really do think so. It would be nice to see him out there and play another solid game to kind of bookend what has been a good finish for him prior to that injury, and you just give a little bit more data on what he is as a quarterback, on who he is as a leader, and playing a rivalry game like this. Like, that would be a really nice way to finish this season. If he doesn't play, I don't know that it should change things terribly, drastically for the Vikings and their plans. I mean, when you look at what you've gotten from him, the improvements that did come down the stretch, I think it's worth staying invested in him and giving him a little bit more of an opportunity next season. But I also do think that whether he plays this week or not, that you do have to have a very high caliber number 2 quarterback who will be able to fill in for multiple weeks, just because McCarthy has not proven to be a guy who can stay healthy. I really do like what we've seen from McCarthy prior to this last injury, and it did look like he was turning a bit of a corner. But I do think that this is a team that just cannot go into next season kind of with the same haphazard backup quarterback plan that they seem to have this year around, just because McCarthy has shown that at any moment he could be out for a week, 2 weeks, multiple weeks. And so they better have a stronger plan in place, but I don't think they have to have a plan to go get a brand new starting quarterback, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think I'm with you in terms of this weekend. Like, it would be nice to have more data, even if the Packers aren't going to play all of their starters, to have, to situate him in that environment a couple weeks after playing the Cowboys and the Commanders and the Giants. It would absolutely be nice. You mentioned Brian Flores earlier. We're talking to John Krasinski, the Athletic, here in for Dan Barreiro. You mentioned Brian Flores and the job that he did Thursday and the defense and he has done all year. What would your reaction be if 2026 comes and Brian Flores is no longer the DC here with the Vikings?
Yeah, I mean, that would be very unfortunate, but also not surprising. Like, I mean, he has done so many good things here as defensive coordinator. And you and I have talked about this a little bit, Alec, and I've talked with Dan about this as well. Like, I think the Vikings have good personnel on defense. I think with Van Ginkel, with Grenard, Harrison Smith in his, waning days, and a few others, Jalen Redmond is another one that deserves you kind of mention here, but I don't think that he is dealing with an abundance of elite players.
Correct.
And so I don't think that this is a situation where the Vikings defense is achieving something because of the overwhelming talent they have on the roster. I think they're doing a lot of it because of scheme, because of understanding, because of the connection that Flores forges with his players and the buy-in that he gets. And so if you were to lose a coach of that caliber, it would be a huge blow to the Vikings. He's been such a huge part of what they've done so far. And how do you kind of replace one of the very best coordinators in the league? That would be a big ask for Kevin O'Connell to go find the next Brian Flores, because I think he is singular in the way that he game plans, the way that he gets guys to believe and figure things out, and absorb a system, and then the way that they go play. And so it would be, a really big obstacle to overcome this offseason, to go find someone who can go do the exact same things with this defense that Brian Flores has done over the last, several years here. Yeah,
you said it, and we've talked about it many times, both in the press box and probably just off mic or what have you. But I mean, it is hard to just fathom among the abundance of questions that they're going to have this offseason, whether it is the type of quarterback insurance that they seek or figuring out a way to climb up, from being in the red from a cap perspective. The way I phrased it for multiple weeks now is like, if you add losing something that has been as sustainable and something you can bet on to the list of add him leaving to the list of the amount of questions that you have, it does become tedious, even more tedious from an offseason perspective.
Yeah, I mean, he's the quarterback of the defense. I mean, I know that, Harrison Smith on the field, obviously, but when you look at what he has done week in and week out, there was a period of the season earlier this year where they were underwhelming, but they've never been bad. They've typically been not just good, but really good, and playing always over and above the level of talent that they do have. They confuse quarterbacks. They wreak havoc with an offensive coordinator's game plan. They just are such a difficult unit to play against, and that is kind of a thing that it's hard to find out there. It is really hard to find guys who can come in and can take a collection of solid players and then kind of elevate them to elite level status. And these last, 6-7 weeks, especially, I mean, they've been elite. What they're doing every week, that's the one thing, Alec, when you look at and try and evaluate J.J. McCarthy, and I do think that he's done a really good job, kind of finishing the season, but you can kind of nitpick it, like, look, they're not playing, the best defenses.
No doubt.
That he's had some success against some weak units, but what the Vikings did to the Lions on Christmas Day was staggering. Like that was a very good team. Yes, they're dealing with some things up front, but they have incredible skill position players. Jared Goff is a really good quarterback. Gibbs, St. Brown, like all these, and they just rendered them completely inept, essentially. And so to have that kind of ability to do that with a defense that is, again, just full of good players and a couple of really good players, but very few elite talents. I mean, it'd be an incredible loss. There's no question about that.
It's interesting. I was texting with someone in the league last night, and we were just talking about like how first round, second round picks are just so important, and this defense was really the subject of the conversation. It was like, when's the last time the Vikings have hit on a first or second round pick defensively? And potentially Dallas Turner might be that guy, but we had to go back to like 2015 with Eric Kendricks and Trey Waynes, which is it was jarring for me, obviously, who has not been here since then. All right, we're going to transition to the Wolves really quickly here because I didn't watch the game Saturday night, and I'm thankful probably that I did not. But can you explain to me, John, why the Wolves seem to have these at-home letdowns frequently against teams that you just frankly would expect them to be better than?
Yeah, it's a character flaw of this team. There's no question, Alec. Now, I mean, the Brooklyn Nets are playing good basketball, and that's almost like the worst case scenario for the Timberwolves is that they play a team where they come into the arena and they look at their record and it's not a good record, and they look at the guys on the other side of it, and yeah, MPJ is a nice player, but they don't really have any household names otherwise. And these guys just do not play with the same intensity, the same energy, the same focus as they do Oklahoma City, as they do Denver, as they do a lot of these other teams. And you kind of heard some of the commentary in the locker room after the game from Anthony Edwards saying, this is just Timberwolves basketball, I guess. And Dante DiVincenzo, basically saying, I don't know why we keep doing this. We talk to each other about it all the time, but we do. And it's maddening because they are a very talented team and they belong, in the discussion with the top four in the Western Conference. I truly believe that from a talent standpoint. And they just consistently do go into these games against teams with losing records without like the all-star, bona fide players. And then they lay eggs and they don't take it seriously. And then by the time they figure out that they're in trouble, sometimes, like Saturday night, it's too late. And so, I'm not sort of like upset necessarily on Saturday with who they lost to, because the Nets are 7-3 in December. They have the best defense in the league in December. They are playing really good basketball, but you do have to be upset with how the Timberwolves approached the game and how they played. They just did not have any sort of connectivity, any sort of juice for most of that night. And those are the nights that when you look back at the end of the season and you're jockeying for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 seed in a jam-packed Western Conference, you're going to kick yourself and you say, that's one of the ones that we let get away. And there's just been too many of those over the last several years. It's a maddening characteristic of this team right now.
Yeah, and it's interesting, from the outside, obviously, where you're trying to parse, like, okay, they expended a heck of a lot of energy on Christmas night in that game against the Nuggets. And I was blown away watching that night. And then there is the factor that you mentioned with the Nets and other teams. Like when the Suns came earlier, a few weeks ago, it felt like certain guys on that roster were playing really well. So it is tough to parse. It's just been interesting, obviously, to observe it. We're talking to John Krasinski here on KFAN. John, where would you say the conversation is around the potential need for a point guard just with this roster and how talented they are?
Yeah, it's definitely something that they're looking at, Alec. They've had conversations internally about adding a point guard. They're certainly kind of combing the league to see what's available out there in terms of players and talent and what they have and what's doable and with the second apron and with all of the constraints that they're working under in the salary cap as well. I'll tell you though that when you look at what this team needs, certainly point guard is there. That's a need on this team, but I'm starting to kind of gravitate away from that position a little bit towards other things, because if you look at the starting five, DiVincenzo, Edwards, McDaniels, Randall, and Gobert, they have one of the best net ratings in the league. That group is playing very well together generally. There's going to be nights where they don't have it and things, but overall, they've been really good, which means that they've mitigated the issues of not having a classic point guard fairly well. But what is really bothering them right now is bench scoring. Unless Naz Reid is having a big game, Alec, they just don't have enough firepower off the bench. And they could also use kind of another rim protector, rebounder to play with that second unit, because the Julius Randle, Naz Reid minutes when Rudy Gobert goes to the bench are really problematic defensively. And so I think they have several issues to look at. And so I don't necessarily believe that point guard is the be all and end all in terms of their targets that they're looking at in terms of trades. I think they have to consider looking for some bench scoring and also looking for a big man as well until Johan Berenger is ready, which probably won't be until next season. So, there's more needs kind of that they're facing right now than just point guard, I think.
It'll be interesting. And I will say this. I have had a blast watching Anthony Edwards the last few weeks. It feels like, what's maybe, I don't know, at least from the outside for me, like gone a little bit under the radar, even in my own mind, I guess, is how much he seems to improve year to year. Like he's this flashy, charismatic, always present figure, but you don't see obviously the in the gym behind the scenes growth that he seems to put in year to year. It's blown me away. I'm sure you're not surprised by it at all, but it does feel like it gives this team even more of a chance if they are as rounded out as everyone here wants them to be, obviously.
Yeah, every season, Alec, he comes in with a new dimension to his game. And that is really proof of all the work that he puts in the summertime. Last year, it was the 3-point shot. And, he put in work all summer long, and he came back and he made more threes than any other player in the league, which was just a staggering improvement when you think of where he started his career as kind of this just get to the basket slasher with a kind of an iffy jump shot. And so, you look that now this year, the huge improvement has been in his decision making. Now he's not Luka Doncic yet or James Harden yet in terms of being that heliocentric star who just really has kind of the game, on puppet strings, but the ball is in his hands much more than it has been in the past because they don't have a natural point guard next to him. And by and large, he's done really, really well with it. There are some high turnover games here and there, but you can see him reading the game better. You can see him anticipating things more than he ever has before. Generally speaking, he's been a guy that just has used his overwhelming athletic gifts to combat whatever was thrown at him. But now you can see him start to think the game more and start to read it and anticipate and do all of those things. And it's been huge for this team. And it really does only kind of raise the ceiling on the type of player that he can be over the next 2, 3, or 4 years. Is that, he's already a top 6, 7 player in the league, and the pathway to top 4 is very difficult, but it is through being able to kind of be one of those guys that wins games mentally as well as physically, and he's getting there with that.
The last one for Jon Krawczynski, and I'll preface this question by saying if you have not read his story on The Athletic, 5-star dinner, hope, and patience, the formula for Kevin Garnett's Wolves return, I highly recommend it. Really, John talked to ownership, kind of consigliaries. It's an incredible piece. John, just personally, what was your reaction when you heard that Kevin Garnett was obviously returning in the capacity that he is?
Yeah, just like my personal reaction is just happiness for all involved, because it really was, this is not hyperbole, Alec, it really was one of the great tragedies in the league over the last 10 years has been the estrangement of the Timberwolves and Kevin Garnett. I mean, this is a franchise that has precious little in the way of history and lore to be proud of, but standing there head and shoulders literally above everything else in that category is Kevin Garnett. And so for him to not be involved with the team that he is most kind of connected to in terms of spending 13 and a half seasons here of his 21-year career, where it all started, I think it will be good for him to be back here and involved and feeling the love of the fan base and everything that it has for him. But mostly I'm just happy for fans, because you can tell that, Kelly LaFrere, who is kind of one of the integral people in brokering this deal and making it happen, said it right. Like, there was this huge hole in the heart of the organization with Garnett not being there, with 21 not being in the rafters. And the fans, you could just tell, wanted to say thank you to Kevin, wanted to say, how much they appreciated all of the energy that he put into this team, every time that he stepped foot on the court. And they just were not able to do that because the parents were fighting. They were kids in the middle of a messy divorce, and they just were not able to reach out and give the guy a hug. And that's what they're going to be able to do when he comes back into that building. It's going to be electric. I think Garnett deserves it. The organization deserves it. And I think the fans, most of all, deserve to really just be able to celebrate their guy and then see eventually 21 up in the rafters. It's just a great thing that had to happen for the health of this league and for the health of basketball in this community. It's just, the two go hand in hand. So getting them back together is it's a really cool thing for sure.
When he's back and in that building, I want to be on sidebar duty for that night, if that's okay. John, thanks for hopping on this Monday afternoon. Always appreciate catching up. Hope I see you this weekend at the People's Stadium for the finale. Looking forward to that. Thanks, John.
Wouldn't miss it, Alec. I'll see you there. All right, man.
Awesome. That'll do it for Jon Krawczynski of The Athletic. Best in the game, one of the best beat writers in the entire sports universe. And we will be back after the break with Ben Leber, legendary Vikings player. I'm Alec Lewis, in for Dan Barreiro on KFAN, with Brett Blakemore operating the controls exceptionally back there and keeping me in check. So we will talk to you guys after the break. Welcome back to Bumper to Bumper. I am not Dan Barreiro. My name is Alec Lewis. I cover the Vikings for The Athletic, here with Brett Blakemore as our producer, and we are going to go directly back to the phones. Our guest now is Ben Leber. Ben is a legend. He is a former player. He is an analyst. Ben, how do I intro? You got like 40 different jobs. I don't know how to do it. How are you?
Alec, you can just stop at legend, buddy. Just say, radio sideline reporter for KFAN. That's all I need.
Radio sideline reporter legend. Ben, thanks for hopping on. I'll start here.
Yeah.
What was going through your mind Thursday as you watched that same game that I and all of the folks listening watched?
Okay, away from the X's and O's, I was actually really impressed by the level of energy that we were playing with, because like we keep mentioning for the last couple of weeks, we've got nothing to play for.
Yeah.
And I've been there, and I've been in those locker rooms where you get into some of these games in December that are technically meaningless other than draft status. And it is sometimes a little harder to prepare and put the time in during the week, and treat it as if it's something that really does matter, and then go out there and play with the same energy that maybe you play for, let's say compared to the last Lions game from at the end of the season last year, where they're fighting for the number one spot. So I was really impressed with just the way the guys came out and they were fighting.
Why do you think this group, you mentioned you've been on teams where late in the season when the realities just set in, and I would just be curious from your perspective why you think this group has kind of transcended that typical feeling.
I don't know. I guess you have to start at the top. It just seems like KOC's mentality and mantra and standard and expectation has been kind of the same throughout the season. It's not like, it doesn't sound like it wavers too much. It's not week to week as far as like, oh, well, we're playing for more this week than we were last week, or, we go with the ebbs and flows of the game situation. I think it's just the same every week. And, so that way when you actually get into games that are technically meaningless, then it doesn't feel like there's a drop off. It doesn't feel like there's a different message. So I think consistent message is probably key.
Yeah. You mentioned away from the X's and O's. So I guess specific to the X's and O's in that game, what caught your eye both in the moment, if you've watched it back? Prayers to you if you rewatched the offense back from that game, but maybe probably specific to the defense and the X's and O's. What impressed you the most with how they were able to stifle Jared Goff and that unit that obviously has the talent that they have?
Once again, we go out and play their offense with Jahmyr Gibbs, and we basically neutralize them on the ground.
Absolutely.
Get them to a situation where they don't feel like they can commit to the run, which is hard to do for that team. I think that was, yes, there's some glitz and glamour with the takeaways and the sacks and the chaos that was created, but we talk about every week, we're like, you got to stop the run.
Yeah.
You can't let them get any sort of life on the ground. And to do that against that team twice this year is pretty remarkable. And not to say they didn't have a couple nice runs. A lot of teams are. It's not like we bottle them up every single run, but for the most part, we frustrated them on the ground. And we are able to, with that disguised package, still be in our run sound gaps, still play gap responsibility, still make the tackles when we need to in a one-on-one situation. So I think that, again, beyond some of the statistics, that was a really impressive showing by the defense.
You just said it, but I've always kind of, as I watch Brian Flores' defense, and they'll line it up on first down where it looks like a pump block, right? And so they've got DBs on the line of scrimmage, linebackers on the line of scrimmage, obviously edge rushers on the line of scrimmage. And I often do wonder, like, how do they comprehend / apply the responsibilities specific to the run game when you've got to be in certain spots? And I know you're not in the defense, so it's probably, tough to say on a minute level, but you probably have a great understanding for the level of aptitude it takes and probably just adaptability on the fly to plug some of those gaps out of these looks.
I think it's harder when you are bluffing at the line of scrimmage, like you said, like it's a punt block. But then the ultimate responsibility is to rotate back to, let's say, a deep cover 2. That's difficult because as you're bailing on the snap of the ball, especially if they have a pull scheme, then all of a sudden you're trying to go backwards to then decipher, okay, what's my new gap? It's not just a standard zone blocking where they're just coming up and there might be an angle that you have to fit. That's a little different, but the A gap is still the A gap and the B gap is still the B gap. But, when they start pulling guys, well, those gaps all exchange. And all of a sudden now there's new gaps created on the play side. That's the difficult part. And, what these guys have done, with all the repetitions in practice, they've managed to get around that. And thankfully, whether, let's say, the front side guy is completely gap sound, well, the backside guy might be chasing that puller, and he might be making the play and making the running back stop their feet. So I think just individually up front, if your job is to get vertical, they're getting vertical, and they're basically neutralizing the run before it even really gets set up.
Yeah. You did the post-game interview with Harrison Smith. We're talking to Ben Leber here on Bumper to Bumper. I'm Alec Lewis in for Dan Barreiro. You, like I said, did the post-game hit with Harrison Smith on the field. Not sure how much I didn't get to see the full thing, but I'm not sure how much emotion he showed there versus in the locker room. If there was emotion, or even as you watch back his presser afterwards, how did that emotion hit you?
The funny thing is, he didn't show a ton of emotion on the field. Definitely appreciation when we talked about his curtain call and the standing O at the 2-minute mark. I think that made him really self-reflect. He was definitely much more emotional, I think, in the locker room. But, when I was on the field with him, the whole defense was over enjoying their time with Netflix and about 10 yards away. So I was very aware of where he wanted to go and where he felt like he needed to go. So I did try to keep it short and sweet, and then let him go enjoy the time on Netflix and have that huge tomahawk steak that they got to bite into, which, God, that looks so good, man. Alec, I'm telling you, I was talking to Murphy Jr. about that in the locker room, and I go, did that taste as good as it looked? He's like, dude, I need to know who that chef is because that was so good. He was like, it was so tender. I don't know how long that thing had been sitting there, but it was still falling off the bone. So, Netflix chef, good job. Everybody, all the guys in the locker room loved it. But the funny thing is with his emotions, we went through this last year, you know, and I don't know if it's really going to hit me and maybe him and everybody else until, truly the last game on Sunday. And even still, I think the weight of it probably won't hit him until, a month later when he finally makes a decision.
Yeah. The funny thing about the steak, I always wonder when they have these post-game meals, where are they cooking them? Who's keeping it hot? How do they transfer the heated food directly out there and ensure it's not cold or it's an incredible operation that no one talks about. I've always thought that.
I know. I think you got to do a story on it. I have been told that the Thanksgiving turkey is very dry and not very good. I think that's actually been talked about kind of publicly, but
sure. But
when it comes to that prime rib or whatever, that bone-in prime rib or tomahawk steak, whatever they had, now that thing was, we need to figure out how they cooked it, how they kept it warm, how it didn't overcook when it was warming. I don't know, but all the guys were like, dang, that was excellent.
That's awesome. All right, we're going to get into a little bit more. We're going to talk Brian Flores specifically, who I had a little bit of talked a lot about at the top. We're going to get into that and more specific to the quarterback with Ben Leber when we come right back from the break. You're listening to Bumper Bumper on KFAN.